Hi, I'm Edward Funk, and this is podcast number 54. This is going to be about Loretta's marriage to her first husband, Grant Withers. And material comes from this copywritten book, Behind the Door, The Real Story of Loretta Young, which is available as a paper book, uh, ebook, and an audiobook. Okay. Now, in the last podcast, barely 17-year-old Loretta Young had eloped with her handsome 24-year-old leading man, Grant Withers. She recalled, Mama wanted the marriage annulled, and because of her objections, both Grant and I agreed that we would not consummate the marriage. But Grant was feeling a lot of pressure. I think it was his ego more than anything else, because the press was in on the act, and sometimes the press pressures you to do things you don't really want to do. They had romanticized this whole thing, and he never said this to me, but I think he probably felt, oh hell, if we call this whole thing off now, I'll look like a bigger jerk than I am. So he talked me into running away to the apartment we had rented at the El Royale to live with his husband and wife. Of course, the press loved that. I'm not sure that Loretta was correct about this, but she told me that Mae West lived there at the time. Okay. Loretta's next film was Road to Paradise. She was playing a dual role of twins, one good, one bad, and Polly Ann was working as her double. Loretta recalled, she was just sitting inches from me, and she didn't speak to me for the whole picture. Mama wasn't speaking to me either. I'd call Mama every day, and she would not come to the phone. One of the girls would say, oh, Loretta, I'm sorry. Mom's lying down or something. I mean, I was so family oriented. And when my family didn't speak to me, I was isolated and felt like I had done something really terrible. I kept calling Mama for 2 months. Finally, I guess she decided that not speaking to me was no way to handle the situation. So one day she came to the phone and said, yes, dear. And I said, well, yes, Mama. I just wanted to know, Mama, if I can come over to see you. She said, well, as a matter of fact, I have to go downtown on some errands, and if you would like to drive me, you can pick me up. So I was back in good graces. And the minute Mama said it was all right, everybody else loosened up. And I already knew by that time that I wanted to get out of the marriage. Now, if Loretta didn't have the fortitude to say no to Grant when he asked her to marry him, um, it was that much harder to tell him she wanted out. Loretta entered a state of suspension. She remembered, I wasn't unhappy with him, but I wasn't happy with him. They went about the business of living together. Loretta recalled, he slept in his room, I slept in my room. Of course, on the honeymoon, um, we slept in the same bed. But it wasn't anything I wanted to run back to. I knew nothing, absolutely nothing at 17 years old. And I frankly was a little surprised, quite surprised, and not too enchanted. It wasn't that he was too forceful or anything, he wasn't. I must say that he was very patient, but either I was too dumb or he wasn't very confident. I'm sure I did a lot of play acting then. Now, Father Ward was a young Catholic priest that Gladys had invited for dinner on a weekly basis, so that her daughters stayed connected to their faith. A few months after, let me see, give me a second. A few months after Loretta's marriage, he admonished her by telling her, you cannot be a movie star and go around behaving as if you're little Jane Doe and have nobody paying any attention to you. Everything you do is going to be noticed and judged. So better a stone be tied around your neck and dropped into the bottom of the ocean rather than you giving a bad example. And you've already done it. 2 16-year-old Catholic girls have been married out of the church. Each of them pointed to your example as an excuse. Those sins are on your soul. So decide now whether you want to be an actress and take a chance of losing your soul, or be an actress and behave yourself. It can be done. Others have done it. Loretta's initial inclination was to dismiss Father Ward's reprimand, but as the years passed, his words would ring louder. She continued to work nonstop. One project was a loan out to MGM titled The Devil to Pay. Loretta recalled, the first couple of days I was so crazy about Ronald Colman that I was tongue-tied around him. Director George Fitzmaurice discovered the source of my problem and must have said something to Ronald Colman because from then on, Ronnie was just warm enough to make me feel a little bit more at ease around him, but not to the degree that it would mislead me. Recounting her crush on Ronald Colman during The Devil to Pay, Loretta had forgotten the context of the situation. She was still Mrs. Grant Withers at the time. Now, Three Girls Lost was another loan out, this time to Fox, and it cast her opposite Josie Sainz' boyfriend, who, by this time, called himself John Wayne. Josie had been a friend since childhood days and would become a more important friend in the years ahead. Meanwhile, Grant's screen career was slipping. He was working, but not as constantly as Loretta, nor were his films as substantial. Grant used to go hunting with other men from the studio, including writer Darryl Zanuck, who would eventually become the head of 20th Century Fox. Loretta remembered, Grant must have gotten in some sort of argument with Zanuck on one of those outings because a remark got back to me in which Zanuck said, he's referring to Grant, he's a half-assed actor anyway, who cares? Grant never said anything to me about it, and I didn't want to embarrass him by asking. The First National Studios Brass decided to capitalize on teen star Loretta's marriage to Grant by pairing them in a film based on the stage play Broken Dishes. The studio, not so subtly, retitled it Too Young to Marry. Grant had received top billing a year earlier with Second Floor Mystery. This time, reflecting the direction of their careers, Loretta's name came first. Grant's need to be a man's man cast further shadow on their fragile marriage. He wanted to be the kind of guy who could drink with the best of them, tease the women, keep raising the ante in a game of poker. His young bride had initially only a hazy notion of this side of her husband. And second, personality. Once this became more apparent, she missed her mother and sisters all the more. Loretta's family was aware that Withers' marriage had serious problems. Pollyanna remembered Loretta confiding that in spite of their combined generous salaries, they only had $25 in the bank. And Georgiana, who was 7 at the time, recalled, I'd gone over to spend the night with Loretta, and the two of us were sleeping in her bed. I remember being awakened out of a sound sleep. Loretta had gotten up, Grant had come home drunk, and I remember they had a terrible fight, screaming and yelling, pounding and everything. I remember that I became very afraid. When I got home, I told Mama, I don't want to go back to Loretta's. Now, Grant was between pictures, and in a few weeks after Loretta's 18th birthday, he accepted an offer to go on a personal appearance tour on the vaudeville circuit. Loretta recalled, the minute Grant got out of town, I called Mom and said, I'm coming home. And I moved back to Fifth Street. Grant wrote letters, but I didn't answer them. I was leaving him. I didn't want to write him any love letters, but I was too much of a chicken to write to him and say I wanted a divorce. One day, Mama said to me, Grant's going to call you, and you have to talk to him. You have to be honest with him. I was too embarrassed to say I don't love you anymore. That wasn't romantic enough for my ideas in those days. In fact, I didn't know how I was supposed to get out of difficulties in my fantasy world. But I finally got up the nerve to tell him on the phone. When Grant came home, Mama said, you two talk it out alone. Grant kept asking, why? I said, I just don't love you anymore, Grant. I didn't dare tell him that I never was in love with him. I may have been a lot of things at 18 years old, but I don't think I was vicious or cruel. Finally, Mama joined in. She said, Grant, she's just too young. to be married. And if she doesn't want to be married, you don't want someone who doesn't want to be married to you. Poor man. I felt so sorry for him, but not sorry enough to stay with him. Now, on July 2nd, 1931, Loretta sued for divorce. A hearing was held in Judge Henry M. Ellis's court on September 15th, 1931. No support was entered as grounds. There is ample evidence that Grant had been a lousy money manager. Although he was still under contract to Warner Brothers at $750 a week and had earned $1,500 a week on the vaudeville tour, he was able to keep up with his child support payments, a child from his first marriage. Loretta's salary had been attached to be an account at the drugstore. Her sister Sally summed it up bluntly. Grant took Loretta for everything she had. He was in a lot of debt. Apparently, he gambled. Now, Loretta was seldom conscious of her father and never realized how much Grant had been like him. He was a good-looking man, nice but weak. She had expected him to take care of her, but in the end, he left the bank account dry. Now, if Grant was like Earl, Loretta was like her mother, capable of taking care of herself. Her career was in high gear. Loretta was now viewed not only as the leading lady, but as a budding star. So, to be continued.